There are two ways to interpret a 20-year arc inside flawed systems. Narrative number one: I got trapped in corrupt systems. I suffered. I finally escaped. Now I'm recovering and helping others to do the same. This narrative creates credibility through suffering. It makes people who identify as survivors feel seen. But it doesn't create authority to build revolutionary platforms. It creates authority to commiserate. Narrative number two: I infiltrated flawed systems consciously to understand their architecture. That infiltration was curriculum. My suffering wasn't failure, it was training. I merged with intelligence that most revolutionaries never have. I'm qualified to teach others through their own passages. This narrative creates authority to build. It appeals to people ready to transform constraint into clarity. I'm Mark Roach. This is transcendent. The arc of your life inside flawed systems can be interpreted as entrapment or as ordained curriculum. Everything changes depending on which narrative you choose. Today, we're integrating the entire series here. And by the end, you'll understand three things. First, why your complete infiltration arc is ordination, not entrapment. What that reframe actually means and why it matters. And second, what qualifies you to teach others through their own passages. And third, how to claim authority earned through lived complexity rather than through formal credential. This comes from my own 20-year arc that I spent years interpreting, at times as failure, before I understood it as curriculum that ordained me to guide others. Now let me show you what that integration looks like. The reframe from victim narrative to ordination narrative is the threshold that transforms your arc from entrapment to education. You've lived inside systems designed to keep you dependent. You felt their pressure to conform. You experienced the constant erosion of your vision. You've maintained integrity through daily practice. You've read the architecture. You've gathered intelligence about what's wrong and what needs replacing. You've recognized when learning stopped, and then you graduated to the next phase. All of that, every difficulty, every frustration, every moment you chose nonconformity at a cost, that entire arc was preparation. You were being trained through lived experience to understand something that books, well, they can't teach, and theory just can't transmit. You were gathering intelligence that only insider access provides. You were developing clarity that only contrast reveals. That entire arc is your ordination. Now let me trace what you learned through each phase, because understanding what you learned proves what you're qualified to teach. Through infiltration, you learn that being inside a flawed system can be education rather than entrapment. You learn that the distinction is whether you maintain conscious intention. You learn that strategic positioning is possible without assimilation. That's what qualifies you to teach others to recognize their own infiltrations as curriculum. Through reading systems architecture, you learned that closed systems have consistent patterns. You learned how to trace power independent of hierarchy. You learned what succession questions reveal about whether a system can evolve. You learned that understanding architecture from inside is intelligence that observation from outside never provides. That's what qualifies you to teach others to read the systems they're operating inside. Through maintaining integrity, you learned that nonconformity is practice, not principle. You learned what it costs to stay conscious. You learned that the cost is temporary, but the benefits are permanent. You learned that clarity about what you believe is the most valuable thing you have. That's what qualifies you to teach others to protect their vision while operating inside systems that are designed to erode it. Through translating frustration, You learn that pain points are specifications. You learn that the gap between what is and what needs to exist is the architecture of what comes next. You learn to read your discomfort as data rather than as failure. That's what qualifies you to teach others to transform frustration into blueprint. Through recognizing completion, you learn to distinguish between learning and extraction. You learn that infiltration has a natural ending point. You learn that exit is graduation, not failure. You learn to claim earned authority even when doubt whispers that you're not ready. That's what qualifies you to teach others to recognize when their time inside is actually complete. Through designing revolutionary platforms, you learned what closed systems cannot do. You learned the 5 principles that create resilience. You learned that distributed authority works, that transparency strengthens rather than weakens, that sovereignty is more sustainable than dependency. You learn that designing for long-term resilience requires different optimization than designing for short-term efficiency. That's what qualifies you to teach others to build what needs to exist. You didn't learn these things in school. You learned them through lived complexity. You earned this knowledge through experience, through difficulty, through choosing integrity at all cost. That's earned knowledge, and it's worth more than formal credentials. That lived experience is your ordination. People often ask, who am I to teach this? What's my authorization? What formal training do I have? Well, here's the answer. You lived it. You gathered intelligence from inside systems most people never access. You made choices that maintained your integrity while most people gradually compromised theirs. You read the architecture while others remained unconscious of it. You survived difficulty without becoming bitter or broken. You transformed pain into clarity and clarity into design. That's your authorization. Not a degree, not an appointment, not permission from anyone else. Your authorization is the fact that you lived this arc consciously and emerged with clarity. You're qualified to teach others to recognize their own infiltrations as curriculum because you've lived your own. You're qualified to guide people through reading system architecture because you've done that. And reading it changed everything. You're qualified to teach nonconformity practice because you've maintained them under real pressure. You're qualified to help people translate frustration into architecture because you've done it. You're qualified to help people. Help them recognize completion because you've experienced it. You're qualified to collaborate on designing revolutionary platforms because you understand what closed systems can't do and why it matters. You're not claiming omniscience. You're not saying that you have all the answers. You're saying, I understand what I understand from living in this arc. I have something specific to teach because I've lived something specific. That's enough. That's everything. This is where many people stumble. They do the work. They gather the intelligence. They achieve clarity. And then the doubt arrives and they diminish what they've learned. They perform humility so extreme that it undermines their authority. They qualify every statement. They apologize for not knowing everything. They act like they're just figuring this out when they've actually figured it out through years of lived experience. Stop that. You've earned authority. Claim it. Not as arrogance, not as knowing everything, not as certainty about all the answers. Claim it as, I understand what I understand from living this arc. I'm using that understanding to build what comes next. I'm inviting others to benefit from the clarity I've developed. You don't need to know more to teach what you know. You don't need to be further ahead to guide people where you've been already or already been. You don't need permission from anyone else to claim the authority you've earned through lived complexity. Your arc isn't happening to you. It's happening through you. The infiltration, the difficulty, the frustration, the clarity, the graduation, none of that was accident. All of it was curriculum. All of it is ordination. You're ordained to teach others through similar passages, not by external authority, by the logic of your own lived experience. You understand what others are going through because you've gone through it. You can recognize the exact moment when someone's infiltration becomes something else because you've been at that threshold. You can help people distinguish between necessary compromise and self-betrayal because you've had to make that distinction repeatedly. You can design platforms with the real principles that work because you've lived long enough inside systems that don't work. That entire arc, from entering oil to exiting corporate, from reading architecture to translating frustration, from maintaining integrity to designing alternatives, that entire arc, well, that's your ordination to guide others through their own passages. If you're recognizing yourself in this narrative, if you're feeling the reframe from entrapment to curriculum, if you're sensing your own ordination, trust that. It's real. Your arc gave you intelligence and clarity that most people never develop. That intelligence is valuable. That clarity is needed. The world needs people who lived inside flawed systems and emerged understanding what needs to replace them. So you're ordained, not by anyone else, but by living life itself, watching, evolving, and by the integrity that you've maintained, by the consciousness that you've preserved, by the difficulty you transformed into clarity. This entire series comes together now. You've infiltrated consciously. You've read the architecture. You maintained integrity. You translated frustration into blueprint. You recognize completion. You learned to design platforms that solve what closed systems can't solve. And now you understand. All of that was curriculum. All of that is ordination. You're not recovering from flawed systems. You're integrated into them. You understand them. You carry their intelligence in your body and your clarity, and now you're qualified to teach others to do the same, to recognize their passages through systems as curriculum, to gather intelligence consciously, to maintain integrity under pressure, to translate pain into architecture, to graduate at the right moment, and to build revolutionary alternatives. That's the arc. That's the teaching. That's your ordination. Everything you've learned is waiting to be transmitted. Everything you've gathered is waiting to serve others. Everything you understand about what systems can't do is waiting to inform you what to build. Your ordination isn't about appointment or credentials. It's about transmission. It's about taking the clarity you've developed and using it to serve people navigating similar territory. That service is why the arc happened. This teaching is what your infiltration was curriculum for. That transmission is your ordination. I'm Mark Roach, and this is Transcendent, wishing you all the best. Your arc from infiltration to clarity is not your burden. It's your ordination to teach others through theirs.